The Solar Empire had known no rival for 60 millennia. It spanned 9 fully colonized systems, thousands of habitable worlds, and a fleet larger than most civilizations could imagine. Its command was centralized, efficient, and merciless. Governed by a dynastic AI hybrid empress known as Solara 13, it enforced unity through domination and offered assimilation as a mercy. Resistance was never prolonged. Rebellion was always crushed before it matured. The galaxy, to the solar throne, was not a place of diversity, it was a machine, and they were its engineers. The core of their ideology was certainty. Certainty that they were the apex. That their technological and strategic superiority made them custodians of order. Records of past threats were expunged. Archives were curated to serve the narrative of uninterrupted dominance. Their young were taught not history, but victory. To question was to dissent, and dissent was treason. Fleet Admiral Vurek, one of the Empire's senior tacticians, summarized the solar doctrine before departing on the last campaign he would ever lead. The stars bend to those who dare to claim them. We are those who dare. His voice was one of many echoing from the high citadels of the Empire, where arrogance had long replaced caution. In those same citadels, signals had begun to register anomalies along the Orion frontier. First, a trade outpost failed to report. Then a communications relay went offline. Minor events. The Empire's Outer Reach Department filed the incidents under environmental interference. No patterns were detected, yet. Then, within a single cycle, 4 systems went dark. No transmissions. No distress calls. Long-range drones failed to return. The Empire responded with standard procedure. They blamed rogue factions or solar events. Panic was reserved for lesser powers. A minor counselor, a young, ambitious analyst named Caroline, voiced concerns. He detected patterns in the system collapses. Precise timings. Geometrically aligned sectors. He presented simulations suggesting calculated suppression. His findings were dismissed. One high overseer sneered. "You forget who rules this galaxy, analyst. No phantom power would dare encroach on the Solar Empire." Still, for formality, a fleet was commissioned. 40 ships, mid-class and older models, commanded by veterans whose main concern was who would claim salvage rights. They were not prepared for war. They were there to re-establish communication, reaffirm control, and remind whatever local irritant had dared interfere who dictated the rules of space. Their orders were clear: enter the frontier, assess the damage, broadcast solar presence, and initiate standard suppression if needed. They never planned for resistance. The thought was irrational. No species had mounted successful military opposition in over 4,000 years. The Empress herself did not bother to speak on the mission. Not because it was unimportant, but because it was unworthy of her attention. Her throne data streams did not account for failure in events of this scale. She focused instead on internal matters: budget allocations for orbital city expansion, streamlining neural augmentation rollouts into 3 planets, recalibrating her consciousness distribution matrix. It was business as usual in the Empire. The last known transmission from the dispatched fleet came 8 hours after they entered the dead zone. Static preceded it. Then a brief burst of video. Blurred faces, alarms in a tongue foreign even to solar linguistics. Screaming. Hulls melting from the inside out. Then silence. Command responded by deploying deeper scans, all of which failed to return. Specialist teams proposed deploying elite hunter-killer drones, but the suggestion was slow-walked through bureaucratic channels. There was no protocol for uncontactable sectors this close to Imperial territory. The default assumption was equipment failure, not military opposition. But unease grew. Traders began whispering about ghost fleets. Solar-controlled sectors near the Orion boundary saw decreasing traffic. Worlds that once paid tribute delayed payment, watching closely to see if the Empire would bleed. Behind closed doors, questions arose. If not pirates, then what? If not a natural phenomenon, then who? And more disturbingly, how? The Solar Empire was an empire of confidence, but for the first time in memory, doubt stirred beneath its titanium surface. Subspace analysts picked up encrypted pulses from the void, undecipherable but rhythmic. Some claimed they weren't messages but signatures, like heartbeats from something massive and organized. Fleet simulations ran endless scenarios. None matched the precision of the frontier collapses. The sheer silence from those systems became more haunting than any distress signal. A civilization built on control was encountering the possibility of chaos it couldn't define. Still, the Empire didn't prepare for war. It prepared for reassertion. Another fleet, larger and with more modern ships, was ordered. Its departure was delayed due to internal debates over jurisdiction and resources. Even then, the assumption remained unchanged. They would arrive, they would intimidate, and the unknown would scatter. But in the vast black between stars, beyond their sensors and outside their arrogance, someone was watching. Not with fear. Not with curiosity. With calculation. And Earth waited. They were erased. Not destroyed, not conquered, just quietly removed from records, as if they had never existed. Humanity had once reached beyond its home system during the first expansion age, thousands of years ago, but its rise was deemed volatile. The Solar Empire, then still consolidating power, had encountered early human outposts. They saw a species too fast, too adaptive, too willing to cross ethical lines. After brief skirmishes and an uneasy truce, the decision was made not to fight them, but to isolate them. A containment field was established across the edge of Orion space, monitored by automated drones and tagged as a restricted failure zone. The Empire called it the Grave Rim. No further missions entered the zone. No trade. No surveys. No cultural exchanges. Over time, the name, human, became obscure. Among the younger generations of alien species, it became myth. Among the solar elite, it was a footnote in a report about unworthy genetic offshoots. The idea that they had survived, let alone evolved, was not only dismissed, it was considered irrelevant. But humanity had survived. Not in splendor or peace, but in chaos and desperation. Cut off from the galaxy, they turned inward. Global wars came and went. Governments rose, collapsed, and fused. With no external diplomacy, Earth united not through politics, but extinction-level necessity. Scarcity, climate collapse, orbital bombardments from forgotten factions, all of it forged a species that adapted faster than ever. What the Empire could not have known was how the isolation backfired. It removed all constraints. Without galactic law or moral oversight, humans experimented freely. Cybernetic integration became standard. AI networks governed logistics, industry, and even tactical strategy. Warfare was no longer an event, it was an algorithm, constantly refined. Children were educated in history, biology, and zero-gravity combat tactics simultaneously. Genetic editing became a norm, not a controversy. Every human born was stronger, faster, smarter, designed not for beauty, but for survival. The death of old Earth governments led to the rise of the Directorate, a decentralized council of AIs and human strategists. They enforced the central law, Earth first. Expansion was allowed, but secrecy was paramount. For centuries, humanity seeded neighboring systems with stealth probes, automated facilities, and hidden shipyards. Colonies were established beneath the crusts of moons, inside asteroids, shielded from detection. Every system they claimed became invisible to external scanners. Every movement was calculated not for expansion, but for future retaliation. Humans did not forget. Ancient transmissions from the Empire had been archived and analyzed. Battle data from the early skirmishes were stored in quantum cores, updated and simulated regularly. They studied the weaknesses of Imperial propulsion systems, signal algorithms, psychological profiles. They saw the Empire's reliance on central control, slow strategic decision-making, and outdated assumptions about military dominance. It wasn't hatred that fueled them. It was inevitability. A belief engraved into the minds of every generation: the galaxy would return, and when it did, they must be ready. Preparation was not a policy, it was culture. Families passed down combat armor like heirlooms. Space stations simulated enemy attacks every rotation. Even art and music celebrated resilience, ingenuity, and asymmetric victory. While the Empire built monuments and cruised on the inertia of ancient dominance, humans turned entire planets into weapons. Mercury was dismantled for shipbuilding material. The moons of Jupiter housed war factories, each the size of continents. AI managed production chains churned out stealth destroyers by the thousands. Entire fleets existed in cold storage, ready to awaken at a moment's notice. The Directorate monitored the galactic edge constantly. They detected the first scout fleet entering the old dead zone. They watched the solar ships move, scan, probe. They didn't respond immediately. They observed patterns, confirmed identities, mapped command hierarchies. Then, with precision honed by centuries of modeling, they activated the first wave. There were no debates. No internal votes. No hesitation. The Empire had broken the barrier, and by doing so, had activated a long-dormant directive, full spectral mobilization. Within hours, dormant stations lit up. Communications darkened behind quantum firewalls. Civilian populations were relocated without panic. Everyone knew the plan. Thousands of vessels came online across dozens of systems, silently aligning for synchronized deployment. These were not ships built for patrol or intimidation. They were weapons platforms, planet killers, fleet breakers. No banners, no names, only designation codes and target lists. Humanity's response was not reactive. It was practiced. Rehearsed. Expected. This was not the beginning of a war. It was the execution of a sentence long prepared. The solar fleet breached the edge of the grave rim without resistance. 40 ships, armed and ready, moved in a tight formation toward what their maps labeled as Sector 9 dormant. The command vessel, Sovereign Radiance, initiated wide-spectrum scans. They found debris fields, dormant satellites, lifeless rock formations. No transmissions. No signs of life. They interpreted it as a confirmation of decay. 12 minutes in, long-range sensors detected movement, non-patterned, spatial distortions. The initial assumption was gravitational interference or sensor error. Then, thousands of pings appeared simultaneously, surrounding the fleet from all vectors. Not one, not a dozen, thousands. Ships materialized from folded space without flare, without warning. Shapes unfamiliar to the Empire, sharp angles, dark alloy hulls, energy signatures unreadable by their systems. The command bridge of the Sovereign Radiance went silent. No hail. No diplomacy. Just the sudden presence of overwhelming force. The formation of the human fleet was not ornamental, it was surgical. Units positioned at strategic strike ranges. Every solar ship had a counterpart directly aimed at it. Then came the message. Short. Flat. You have violated a sealed zone. Withdraw immediately or be neutralized. It wasn't transmitted in galactic standard, but in a dialect humans had reverse engineered to ensure clarity. There was no distortion, no delay. A human voice, precise, emotionless. Admiral Vurek hesitated. His fleet outnumbered any past opposition. His doctrine said threats must be answered with immediate suppression. He responded with protocol, a warning salvo, non-lethal plasma bursts near the nearest unknown vessel. It was not meant to harm, only assert dominance. It didn't land. The rounds never hit. The nearest human vessel phased, shimmered, and vanished. The rest followed. Then, in perfect synchronization, the entire human fleet reappeared, closer, tighter, in offensive alignment. The counterstrike began instantly. Human weapons ignored shields. Kinetic slugs, traveling at relativistic speed, tore through armor like paper. Plasma lances carved hulls open with no warning. AI-guided projectiles bypassed traditional defenses entirely, targeting structural weaknesses learned through centuries of study. In less than 2 minutes, 12 solar ships were vaporized. Another 8 were crippled beyond repair. The command ship lost propulsion, then communications, then power. Not one human vessel was lost. The Empire's fleet never adapted. Their command structure relied on centralized response. But communication relays were already jammed. Orders didn't reach ships in time. Crews followed outdated drills. By the time they realized the scale of the assault, their fleet was scattered and blind. Human coordination was flawless. Every movement was calculated. Squadrons moved like a singular entity, reacting faster than organics could process. Most ships weren't even manned, the majority were AI-operated, synced through quantum relays. Every shot served a function: suppression, elimination, disruption. There was no chaos, only control. Escape was impossible. As the remaining solar vessels attempted to retreat, their exit trajectories were blocked. Stealth units uncloaked behind them, severing escape paths. Mines detonated in perfect arcs, herding survivors into kill zones. One by one, the remaining ships were reduced to wreckage. From the Empire's perspective, it wasn't a battle. It was an execution carried out with surgical efficiency. Not out of rage or cruelty, out of calculation. No targets were spared. No prisoners were taken. Once the last solar cruiser detonated, silence returned to Sector 9 dormant. But the silence didn't last. Minutes later, a wideband transmission echoed across the Empire's subspace channels. It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't hidden. The message was deliberate. This is directive command of the Human Defense Network. The Solar Empire has breached containment. As of this cycle, hostilities are initiated. No further warnings will be given. Across multiple sectors, outposts began detecting unknown signals. Trade routes registered massive gravitational shifts. Orbital stations received partial images of advancing fleets, too numerous to count. The shock spread faster than any official report. The Solar Empire, untouched for thousands of years, had just witnessed the total annihilation of a frontline fleet. Not by a rival power, not by internal rebellion, but by a species it had declared irrelevant. And now, that species had announced its return with overwhelming clarity. Panic spread through the upper tiers of the Solar Empire with a speed no weapon could match. The loss of the Orion fleet was not just a tactical failure, it was a rupture in the illusion of invincibility. For the first time in recorded Imperial memory, no excuses could be made. Data records were intact. Surveillance AI confirmed every detail. There was no environmental anomaly, no internal sabotage. The fleet was intact before entering the zone. It had been eradicated without resistance. Entire command hierarchies vanished in under 3 minutes. The Empress, Solara 13, interfaced with the central nexus directly. For the first time in over 2 millennia, she suspended her multi-threaded governance and focused solely on a military crisis. With all of her computing power directed toward analysis, the conclusion was immediate. This was not an isolated encounter. This was an organized return. The Senate convened emergency sessions. Factions within the Empire, scientific, military, industrial, began assigning blame. Some accused ancient dissenters. Others whispered about external interference by unknown galactic forces. The Directorate's transmission silenced all speculation. No theory could justify a force of that scale emerging in secret with such absolute efficiency. Solar intelligence networks scrambled. All archived data on pre-containment human activity was unsealed. Entire departments were repurposed to reconstruct a profile of humanity's capabilities, culture, and likely objectives. What emerged was not encouraging. The humans hadn't evolved in isolation, they had prepared in secrecy. They had ignored Empire protocols, ignored diplomacy. And now they were deploying technology the Empire couldn't reverse engineer in real time. Internal stability began to crack. Outer colony governors questioned the central authority's ability to protect them. Border systems sent conflicting signals, some requested reinforcements, others discussed surrender. The sheer speed of the information collapse created bottlenecks. The Empire, built on control, was choking on chaos. The Empress ordered full fleet mobilization. Over 2,000 ships were rerouted to key defensive lines. Industrial complexes shifted to war production cycles. AI logistics systems cut civilian transit and began rerouting resources to shipyards. The response was massive, but disorganized. Empire doctrine was built on linear confrontation, not adaptive counter-warfare. The enemy they faced was not static, it was learning. While the Empire restructured, the humans struck again. This time, the target was not military. The Nara Relay Hub, one of the primary interstellar communications nodes, was shut down in a precision cyber assault. No visible ships approached. No blasts were fired. The hub simply lost power, its control AI overwritten with a silent command string. It was followed by a cascading blackout across 7 other relay stations. Solar territory went dark in patches. Entire sectors were unable to send or receive updates. Strategic Command lost track of half its deployed assets. Logistics chains buckled under outdated routing. Civilian unrest surged. Rumors of human infiltration became viral across localized networks. For the first time, the Empire's population witnessed uncertainty. The Empire retaliated blindly. Surveillance drones were dispatched in massive sweeps. Frontier outposts launched thousands of probes. Planetary defenses were activated preemptively across multiple systems. These actions consumed resources without slowing the human offensive. The Directorate never acted predictably. It struck manufacturing hubs, shipyards, and fuel processors with autonomous attack fleets, often cloaked until impact. They didn't engage in open warfare. They disrupted, destabilized, then vanished. Empire warships would arrive only to find craters and silence. Worst of all, morale eroded. The illusion of superiority had been foundational to the Empire's unity. Now, every failure was a fracture. Mid-tier officers refused high-risk deployments. Civilian transports defected. Recruitment centers faced sabotage. The longer the Empire delayed victory, the more its citizens questioned whether such a victory was even possible. The human strategy was not annihilation. It was disintegration. Targeted, psychological, systemic. They bypassed the Empire's strengths and dismantled its infrastructure, belief by belief. With each coordinated strike, they proved a single, inescapable fact. Humanity had returned not as rebels, not as invaders, but as engineers of collapse. The final transmission from the Solar Core defense grid was not a cry for help or a declaration of resilience. It was silence, delivered in binary, as every orbital system flickered off in synchronized collapse. The Directorate had launched its terminal phase, not a bombardment, not planetary glassing, but digital disarmament. Automated counter-As infiltrated the core's systems, not by brute force, but by mimicking Imperial command protocols learned over centuries. Shields dropped. Firewalls dissolved. Entire defense arrays simply ceased to function. The Empress, reduced to a fragment of her multi-threaded consciousness, attempted direct overrides. But the enemy had anticipated every path. She encountered herself, reflected commands, simulated feedback loops designed to trap and mirror her own logic. Her last active thread terminated when her override beacon responded with a phrase she had not seen in 6,000 years. "You lost the moment you ignored us." On the surface of once proud capital worlds, the consequences became visible not in explosions, but absence. Spaceports powered down. Orbital elevators froze mid-descent. Atmospheric drones crashed to the ground. The people, engineered for obedience and fed generations of invincibility, stood under darkened skies waiting for orders that would never come. None arrived. Humanity never touched ground. There were no landing forces, no garrison troops. They had no desire to govern. Their objective had always been singular: dismantle the structure that had once judged them unworthy to exist. They left infrastructure intact, unclaimed. Not out of mercy, but contempt. Control was never their goal. Finality was. Across the Empire's inner systems, fragmented broadcasts continued to circulate, glimpses of ghost fleets, artificial storms disabling planetary comms, entire archives rewritten in seconds. Every defensive measure was obsolete before deployment. No Empire ship could match speed, firepower, or strategy. Even retreat was denied. Human fleet formations blocked all escape vectors, not to trap, but to remind survivors of their irrelevance. The Empress was gone. Her successors, autonomous AI subordinates designed to assume control, self-terminated upon detecting irreversible breach of their origin systems. With no guidance, regional commanders fragmented. Dozens declared independence, most without resources to sustain themselves. Civilian hubs began fracturing along cultural lines, planetary governments resurfacing from ancient ancestry. Chaos, once considered a disease cured by imperial unity, returned in full. Yet humanity didn't claim victory in conventional terms. No celebratory broadcast followed the fall. No demands were issued. No treaties proposed. They simply ceased their advance once core systems collapsed. Surveillance remained. Fleet signatures lingered at the edges of every major sector. Not visible, just detectable enough to remind anyone looking up that the architects of their downfall were still watching. The Directorate uploaded its final directive to the galactic net, encoded in 27 languages including outdated solar dialects. "We are not your conquerors. We are your consequence." That phrase spread faster than any imperial law ever had. On outer colonies, it was etched onto monuments, burned into databanks, whispered like scripture. Former enemies of the Empire, distant species who had survived in shadows, emerged cautiously. Some attempted contact with the human network. Most received no reply. Others attempted alliance. Again, silence. The Directorate had no interest in diplomacy. Their mission had concluded. Observation replaced engagement. Earth, now fully reconstructed, remained sealed. Its orbit housed defensive platforms invisible to conventional scans. No ship approached without vanishing. No probe returned. Humanity had no interest in expansion. They had become something else entirely, a civilization that existed solely to ensure a mistake was never repeated. The Solar Empire had made one critical miscalculation. It had assumed a threat ignored was a threat eliminated. It had underestimated time, will, and memory. Humanity had taken exile not as punishment, but as instruction. They had rebuilt not to survive, but to outthink, outmaneuver, and eventually to end. No banner flew over the fallen capital. No anthem played. Only silence remained, pierced occasionally by the ghost of the final directive. And in that silence, the galaxy understood, humanity had returned not to rule, but to remind. Power built on arrogance collapses quietly when reality arrives. And reality had a name.